Hey guys, it's Dan. This is a video that I mentioned I wanted to do in the last video that I put out, which is kind of tutorial on how to do the jungle bases that I'm doing for my lizards. This mostly follows the kind of progression that I laid out in my other basing video, kind of the standard basing, I'll call it, for everything else that I do. But I do something a little bit different with the lizards. So what I'm doing here is a variation on what I've mentioned in that video, which is that when I put sand down, I use paint. And in this case, instead of dunking the model into the mixture with the sand, I just kind of sprinkle it on to add some texture. And then once that's dried, I'll go through and add a couple of larger rocks in. As you see here, I put that down with super glue though, just because it holds more firmly. And then once everything's dried, I'll come back in with that same brown color that I used to put the sand down, and then I'll just reapply that over everything to get good solid coverage. It's kind of a satiny color too, just because I figured it's the jungle, so everything's going to look kind of wet. And yeah, so I'll reapply this over the base here. I'll let that dry. And then once that's dry, I'll go through and take like a dark gray color and paint in the larger rocks, both the very large rocks that you'll see like there, and then kind of smaller clusters of rocks, even stuff that was maybe just larger grit sand. I might paint some of that dark gray just for the contrast of it. And then I'll take this is actually the color that I use as the base color for again, my standard basing, and I use this, just a quick dry brush just to pick up some of the sand that is on the bases here. So again, you're not going over the entire base, just the pieces that have sand on it, just to pick up the raised areas. You'll find if you go over the flat areas, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it'll leave kind of streaks behind, which doesn't look supernatural. And then I'll come in with a lighter gray and just dry brush the rocks really quickly. So let's talk about grasses, foliage, so to speak. There's three kinds that I use here. I'm very fortunate. I have a really large collection of basing materials because it seems like every time I go anywhere, I pick something up. So I kind of throw the kitchen sink at these bases. So this first kind is flock, kind of standard old school flock. It's really good for undergrowth on these bases, so pretty much everything gets some of this flock. I have two different types that you saw there in the bags. I had a quick clip of me also putting down just selective static grass as well. And I don't know where that clip went to, but you can see I'm also using a piece of paper here in the background, which is nice because if any spillage happens, you can then kind of curl it up and pour it all right back into the bag that it came from. So two kinds of flock, and now we're on to clump foliage, which you can see me ripping apart here into smaller pieces that I'll also glue down with super glue. I've got two kinds of this clump foliage. There's the lighter green that I've had that bag since I was probably 10. It'll be buried with me, I think. And there's a darker one too, and you'll see when I put that stuff down, that's newer, I picked that up, that it's kind of fibrous. I don't know how else to describe it, but it leads to, you can see it there, it looks almost like ivy or vines or something come off of it. So again, a color variation there and a textural variation there. But the key is just, rip it apart into smaller pieces and then glue it down where it makes sense. The other part here that's important to note is that other than that flock that I put down, I don't put this stuff on every single base. Let's call it maybe half the bases get the clump foliage here. This is some lichen that I found. I think I even maybe at a pet store or something. And it looks kind of like coral or a dead plant or something. I don't know. I'm just throwing that on the base. Why not? So just a couple of those get that. As I said, variation is key here. You don't want to overload the bases too much. And now we're on to tufts. So I have probably like 12 different things of tufts of different colors and sizes and shapes. And so I use pretty much all of them because this is the jungle. So I figured there's going to be a lot of variation when it comes to plant life. So as I said, though, what I typically do is I'll take larger ones and break them apart like this. And then not every base, of course, gets every kind of tuft. If you saw all of those different boxes there, I'll probably, as you see here, this montage here I'm doing I'll pull maybe one or two out of each and then scatter them around. These are 20 skinks that I'm working on. It's a pretty good number I've found in terms of using everything and having variation without things looking like they're cluttered. These are, I think for railroads, I picked these up. I have three different kinds, and they're larger. I think these are 10 millimeters as opposed to like 3 or 4, which is typical for tufts. But you can see they're much larger, and it adds some nice height variation. And I played around with it a little bit to make it look kind of like the skinks were running through these. But as I mentioned, they're also quite large, so I typically break them apart, as you see here, into 2 or 3 pieces even before I glue them down. These are my favorite. So these are floral tufts. It's just like a regular tuft, but it has what looks like, colored flock even that gets put down on top. So I'll throw, a couple of those down as well. I need to pick up some more of those because I like them so much. This is where things sit after I'm done with all of my, I'll call it again, standard kind of basing materials. And then what I did is I picked up, it's like a $6 bag of aquarium plants from Walmart. And so what I do, I think that's enough in there to last the entire project, I believe. But what I do is I just kind of rip off pieces off the top. And what you'll see in this sped up video here is that I then rip it up further, because these plants look really unnatural if you just glue them down exactly as is in most cases. So what I do is kind of rip the leaves off and cut the stems off, and then sort of reassemble them on the bases once I have the individual components to make a plant. So that's what you can see me doing here, is sort of cleaning up the jagged pieces that look like what it is, which is an aquarium plant. Get all that removed so that I have just the individual leaves and stems to work with. And then here, you can see me applying it to the base. I'm not super heavy-handed with these. I think I could probably even do more, especially on a unit of this size. But I also don't want to, they're quite distracting. You'll see at the end, if everybody's got an aquarium plant on it, it's going to look like a lot. So I use a gentler touch when it comes to how many aquarium plants get put down. I would say that maybe 1 in 4, like quarter of models, I'll have some kind of aquarium plant. This one's probably my favorite because I was able to keep it as one large piece, and it sort of looks like the skinks moving through it. And here's another one that I felt looked natural enough as it was. So yeah, again, variety is key here. And then once the plants are all down, one piece that I go back and do is I use Nurgle's rod. If you've got water effects, you could use that, but I kind of like the swampy effect that it leaves behind. And what I do is I'll put a dab of Nurgle's rod down, and then I come in with just water on my brush, and that will dilute it a bit and help it spread out over the base. And it dries much darker than it looks, so it'll look just like kind of swampy, muddy earth. So what I do is I'll go through and look for any remaining flat areas that have no sand on it, no tuft, no static grass, no flock, and I'll just throw a little bit of, like a pool of Nurgle's rod on it. And once that's done, I'll go through and do the edges of the bases. I usually use Rhinoxide, but because the base was so dark in this case, I used Steel Legion Drab, just a lighter color. So it typically takes probably 2 applications. And then here's the finished product. This is what they look like. As I said, you can use more or less, whatever you want to do. More jungle plants, more everything else. Whatever you think looks best for your armory and whatever you have available. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Happy painting.